Join the coven. Housebreaking. A story written by nmwrites. I forget who came up with the idea. We found ourselves short on cash, and an easy score sounded exactly what we needed. Something to pump some money into our meager coffers. Hard times for the dumb and wicked. The house loomed over the intersection at the back end of the neighborhood. A big, old Victorian, the kind packed full of old stuff we could pawn. Eddie got the info from his nosy aunt, who lived down the street. The couple had no kids, no pets, and seemed weirdly codependent to the rest of the neighborhood. They always went everywhere together, always. One car, zero chance of either of them being home if it wasn't in the driveway. Plus, they liked to travel on weekends. Being gone all Friday night meant they would be gone on Saturday night too, sure as rain. I honestly couldn't believe the place hadn't already been robbed. We hung out with Eddie's aunt on Friday night, playing gin rummy and drinking cheap beer while she smoked. Honestly, I enjoyed it. She likes the company, and she's a hoot. Growing old by yourself is a hell of a thing. We all noticed the lack of light from the house down the street, though. The empty driveway beckoning to us. I ran my hands over my thick stomach as I glanced at it, going to seed. As the saying went, tap my fingers across the skin. I needed this score. Maybe it would turn things around. The next night was perfect. The cloud cover had been thick all day, and the guy on the local channel said it would last all night. I had already sweated through the black shirt I wore for nighttime jobs. The humidity here in the summer wrecks me. We ducked into the driveway and circled around the back of the house. Eddie kept a lookout while Chuck and I checked out the door. I almost gasped as he pushed the unlocked door open, watching it swing inward with a slight groan. Somewhere in the primitive reptilian recesses of my brain, something told me this felt wrong. Chuck whispered to Eddie, though, and the next thing I knew, I followed them through the door. I checked for a keypad or motion sensors, but we really had just waltzed into the house. I stood in the kitchen, near the back of the house, trying to get a sense of the layout around Eddie's bulking form. A large man, Eddie's hard-won muscles now laid under a layer of fat he joked could stop a knife from hitting anything too important. We stood in front of a staircase, and Eddie suggested we start from the top and work down. I've wondered since that moment if we still could have run. In that moment, if I could have said that something felt wrong, spent $20 on a few burgers from McDonald's and a case of Ice House, and instead zoned out and watched the late game from the West Coast. Regrets. I've had a few, and as old Blue Eyes once said, they were already dead, of course. Or they weren't. The house, our mark, was no house. It was a maw, a fanged mouth in the night. The house scared me on some visceral level. It looked old, but well kept. Our flashlights danced across the signs of a pleasant home. Though at the same time it felt alive with malice. I remember the framed cross-stitch that I passed as I started up the stairs. Maybe the last real thing I'll ever see. Sitting there in a nice-looking frame, it said, "Never alone." I know what that means now. We walked up the staircase and came to the second floor. Things looked normal, a hallway with a series of rooms off it. The same worn, red carpet stretching across the floor in all directions. I glanced down the hall and saw only a line of closed doors. We walked up another flight and the staircase ended. This floor looked the same as the last, a hallway with rooms off it. We split up to look for loot. I walked into a room and gave it a once-over. My eyes scanned the room back and forth, up and down like a lifeguard, but I looked for things I could pawn. The TV looked too old to sell, but I found a nice-looking jewelry box and snatched it up. I flipped through the drawers, but everything else looked like junk. Out in the hall, Chuck stared out of the window. His wiry body seemed barely visible against the dark glass. "You okay, buddy?" "Lights are out," he replied, his thick accent making it basically one word. "Lights are out." "Huh?" He gestured out the window. "Whole neighborhood. No power." I reached back into the room behind me and flipped the switch on and off. Nothing happened. I shrugged. Good. No power means no one will care if they see a few flashlights out a window. Eddie joined us, and we headed back down a floor. The second floor was obviously used more, and we had more luck. I even found a couple $100 in cash in a nightstand, along with an expensive-looking watch. I bumped a clock radio, reaching for a watch, and it flared to life, sounding an alarm that must have been broadcast over the radio. Emergency alert. This warning is for all residents of Redacted County. Emergency procedures are in effect. Do not go outside while emergency procedures are in effect. Repeat, do not go outside while emergency procedures are in effect. I hit the switch and the radio died. It unsettled me, though. What the hell were emergency procedures? I glanced out the nearest window. Didn't seem to be storming at all outside. I walked back out into the hall, a bit shaken up, just in time to see Chuck disappear back up the stairs to the third floor. Idiot! Eddie came into the hall. Where's Chuck? I just saw him go back upstairs. Upstairs? Why'd he do that? I shrugged. I'll go get him. This place gives me the creeps. Eddie nodded. I walked upstairs and called Chuck's name. I didn't get a response, and I didn't see the glow from another flashlight. Maybe he wanted to pee and couldn't find a bathroom. I checked 3 rooms when I saw flashlights dancing in the hall. Chuck and Eddie stood there. Where were you, Chuck? I asked. Downstairs with you. Why'd you come back up here? I followed you. Why would I come back up here? We stared at each other. Let's get out of here. We've found enough, Eddie suggested quietly. I nodded. We headed down 2 flights of stairs and headed for the exit. We were still on the 2nd floor. We all paused, silently recounting the staircases in our heads. Something didn't add up here. We walked down the stairs again. First 1 floor, then 2, then 5. Each landing brought no escape, but rather another identical-looking floor. We cursed under our collective breath. Every time we hit a floor, somehow hoping that after going up 2 flights of stairs, going down for the 18th time or the 22nd would be the one that freed us. Chuck snapped first. He ran down the hall before running into a room and slamming the door. Eddie and I hit the door seconds after he slammed it shut, literally steps behind his skinny butt. But when we swung the door open, we saw only an empty room. Eddie swore again. This place is not right, man. I kicked the wall in frustration. Let's go down again. If every floor is the same, Maybe he's in the same room down a floor? Eddie glanced around the empty room again. Seems as good an idea as any I've got. We walked down the stairs again and re-entered the room. This time, a TV stood on a lone stand and flickered on as soon as we stood in front of it. A news anchor looked sternly at the camera.
Emergency procedures are in effect. Do not attempt to go outside.
His mouth didn't move.
You haven't been right in years, Eddie. Not since that night in Madison.
I looked at Eddie, who just stared at the screen. That's not possible. No one knows about that. When I looked back to the screen, blood ran down the wall behind the anchor man.
We know, Eddie. You should have stayed somewhere safe tonight. You should not have come here.
Eddie knocked me over, running for the door. I dropped my flashlight, and by the time I regained my feet, he had vanished. I didn't know if he had gone up or down the stairs, but honestly, I didn't know that those directions even meant anything anymore. I tried to work my way back up the stairs, finding floor after identical floor on the way. I started checking rooms on each floor, but only nightmares greeted me. One room contained a giant serpent that lifted its great head at me as I opened the door. On the walls of another hung paintings that all depicted my violent death. I don't know how long I climbed. I switched directions multiple times, winding up and down the stairs through the endless house. Now the doors stood open on every floor. I caught glimpses of giant, horrible shapes in the shadows through the gaping apertures. I arrived on a floor, finally lined with hooded figures, each standing in front of a closed door. One door stood open at the end of the hall, and I could see the dancing blue light from a TV inside it. I entered. On a table in front of me laid a long silver knife. I picked it up and saw Chuck and Eddie tied to chairs in front of me, both gagged and staring at me with fearful eyes. I blinked. They hadn't been there a second before, but they remained. The TV that lit up the room showed the newsroom I saw earlier. But now the news anchor stood in the room next to it, with his mouth sewn shut. You have to choose. I'm not sure where the words came from with his mouth all messed up like that, but I heard them clear as day. I stared at him as he spoke again while crossing the room towards me. Choose. Kill one of your friends. You will be allowed to leave with the other. I glanced back and forth between Chuck and Eddie. Both pleaded at me with their eyes, begging to be spared. I looked at the news anchor. Then, back at them. I had only one real decision to make. Damn if I'm not loyal to the last. The knife caught the anchor in the gut, and he clearly hadn't anticipated it. I heard his voice once more. A mistake. I crashed to the floor, the room suddenly empty, immediately filled with daylight. The anchor, the TV, even Chuck and Eddie had vanished. I laid on the floor, completely alone. I stood up and made my way to the now empty hall. I walked down the stairs and found myself back in the kitchen. And let me tell you, I tore through the door and back to my van as fast as I could. I made record time back to my apartment, and by the time I had realized I hadn't seen a single person the entire return trip, I had already made it upstairs and locked myself in. All of that happened 3 days ago. The view out my window shows me a world devoid of any life. I haven't seen a single car or person in that entire time. Even though I've barely taken my eyes off it, the TV doesn't work at all, nor does the radio. Last night I finally heard a noise in the hall, and almost flung the door open in excitement. I barely managed to check the peephole first. I can see Eddie and Chuck standing outside. Their eyes are red, their skin is a deathly gray, and they're standing there, unmoving, watching my door. There isn't another way out. They're blocking the only one, and I don't know how much longer I can wait before I try to get past them. Am I still in the house? Are we all still there? Can anyone see this? Maybe I'll make a run for it.